Hello friends, welcome to Salesforce Cinematics 33. So in today's video, what we are going to learn is we are going to learn about the considerations or the important factors which we need to keep in mind when we are using joins. Okay. So basically, instead of me kind of going through it first, let me first tell you, if you just search on Google joins in recipe and if you open this particular Salesforce document link, and here if you go for this join operations, right, they have this point called considerations when using joins. Fine. Now here, basically, if you go through this complete article, they have actually covered the subtle difference which we have between left join and the lookup join with multiple values. Fine. Now definitely there's a very subtle difference, and that is something they have of course explained over here. Fine. Now the thing is that the ultimate conclusion which we come is when we need to use left join and when we need to use lookup join, I mean lookup with multiple values join. Okay, so anyways, that lookup with multiple values, don't consider that join, but yeah, still, since it's there under the joiner, I'm just referring by that name, lookup multiple values join. Okay, when you want to prevent any duplicate records, we have to use a lookup instead of a join. Okay, if you must use it, try adding more key fields to make the keys have more unique values. Fine. Now, what does that mean? Okay, let's quickly come back to this Excel sheet. This whole thing is completely clear. What we will look is only this part. Okay, so let me underline this and let me highlight this with yellow, and we will look into lookup multiple values. Okay, these are the two things which we will look into. What exactly it happens, because if you see the exercise which it performs is basically the same, but there's a very subtle difference. And of course, one of the differences, the records are getting repeated. But the problem is, when you check on the designer layer, on the dataset layer, right, you don't get to see that until unless, you go to compare table, or if you go to values table. But that is something which I mean, on the values table, of course, you get to see this difference. For example, if I open this left join file, okay, and if I open this lookup multiple value dataset file, so here, as you can see, there are 8 records. So if you directly jump to values table, definitely you see the difference in the number of records, which I do agree with you. However, there is one more subtle difference which you get to see when you bring anything in the chart mode, okay, which is this one. Okay, here, of course, it's getting repeated on left and right. That is, let's say if I go to this chart mode, okay, and here also if I go to chart mode, fine. Now for this one, if you see, that is left join. If I bring this particular account name, okay, and also if I bring in the op name, okay, and from here also if I do the same thing, that is I bring in the account name as well as I bring in the op name, okay. Now on the chart mode, if you see, we hardly see any difference. I mean A1, ON1, ON6, and anyhow, when you go to chart mode, as I explained you earlier, if any matching node doesn't come up, right, like if the right part is null, then definitely that doesn't come up on the chart mode side, which is fine. That is not a big deal. But the actual number of rows you should always see in the values table. That's the main thing. But there's one more thing to consider. Let's say I bring something called as, if I go for bar length and if I go for sum of op amount, okay, instead of count of rows, because count of rows we don't see any difference. It's the number of count, which is fine. But if you go to this sum of amount, no, now if you see the difference here from the opportunity side, the amount is coming as 1K and 1K. However, on this lookup value, the amount is coming as 2K and 2K. Now, if I directly jump back to my Excel sheet, see for this A1, the matching part is this one, right? See, the op amount I've anyhow taken as 1000. Okay. So there's nothing to like separately look into this. Everything is taken as 1000. But when you do the lookup, I mean, when you go for left join, it individually shows you the op amount. Okay. For example, if I write here op amount, right? See, for this A1, it will individually show you 1000. Okay. For this AN6 also, it will individually show you 1000. And the same thing gets repeated for this AN2. I'm taking only this 4 because these records are getting repeated from the right. I mean, AA1 we have ON1, ON6, and from AN2 we have ON3 and ON7. Okay, that is something which you clearly see on the left join. Okay, now what happens when you do a lookup multiple values, right? Because I know many of you have this confusion that what is basically the difference between left join and lookup multiple values. Now, as I showed you here, right, because it consolidates the data, and definitely if you just go for count of rows because it's on a count level, right, you don't get to see that difference. It will show as 1 1. But now because it consolidates the data, right, what happens if you take the op amount now, right, the op amount over here, it will actually sum it up. Okay, so basically it will be 2000 over here, as well as it will be 2000 over here as well. Why? Because it's summing up both of this. Okay. However, when you go to chart mode, it's displaying as ON1, ON6, right? I mean, sorry, over here, lookup multiple is displaying as ON1, ON6 is displaying as separate two rows in the chart mode. But the issue is this op amount is getting consolidated. Now, let's say if I open this lookup multiple value also, right? And if I go to this values table, observe very carefully here, you don't get to see both the names, isn't it? However, because it's consolidating, for ON1, we don't have the amount as 2000, right? Because amount I've already taken as 1000, isn't it? In my Excel sheet, from the right, I'm taking the amount as 1000. But in the chart mode, in the values table, it's only displaying the first op name, and the amount being displayed is 2000. Why? Because although it's not showing as a different entity in the values table, because the records will remain the same. That is, this one, 6 records. But the problem is the amount is getting consolidated, which I told you. So we can come to this conclusion that if you have a measure field, right, and because other than that, there's hardly any difference. If you go to values table from record wise, you will understand the difference, which is fine. But when it comes to chart mode, it won't be visible. Or even in values table, you can't actually know whether the measure field is completely correct or not. For example, in lookup multiple values, if you're doing that, and if you're opening the data set and if you go to values table, here the client might just feel that because it's coming ON1, it is 2000. Or even if the client sees that lookup multiple value data set in chart mode, it will be under the assumption that, ON1 and ON6 are having each record as 2000, which is not the case. Okay. The ideal way to look at it is that from the left side, from the account perspective, the total is 2000, right? So when you're going for lookup multiple values, you can't bring in the right side information over here, especially if it is a measure field, because it's just consolidate the data. Okay. So if the client is only interested on the left side of it, that is the account side, then definitely he or she will get to see the correct information, but he will not get to see any correct information from the right side, especially if it's a measure field. Okay. As you can see clearly the difference over here. That's the difference, subtle difference between left join and lookup multiple values. Fine. Very hard thing to gauge. And usually we don't go for lookup multiple values on recipe side. We usually go for left join. However, this thing is something you have to keep in mind, because if you are showing something which have the consideration of going for lookup multiple values, lookup join, then you can go for it, provided you show the right information and the client is also having proper training and knowledge of what information to look at. Fine. That's the thing. And that is something which they have beautifully explained over here also in this particular Salesforce article. But yeah, I just thought to also make a video on it and explain to you. Fine. So yeah, that's it about this. With this, we come to the complete end of joins. There's nothing much left. I have separately explained you what is left join, right join, inner join, outer join, lookup single value and lookup multiple value cross joins, as well as I have also done one session where I've given a complete recap or revision of all the joins which we've done. And in this last video, I've given you a subtle difference between left join and lookup multiple value join. Okay. So yeah, you have to ensure that the duplicate part doesn't come in, especially if it's a major field. And yeah, thank you all. Please do like, share, and subscribe.